Most of the things that you would call economics, you could probably say are a mixture of geometry and biology and a bit of psychology, but it's in that range. Psychology sets some limits. By that point, we may think we may have some room to move against those. And if we had those limits present in our minds all the time, we would have more interesting, nuanced visions that actually could happen, you know, in the context of those facts of life. So I'm going to give you a very simple example. The San Francisco Airport BART extension, which I was around in San Francisco when this was being planned. The BART extension to San Francisco Airport ended up ending in this little triangle, where there was going to be a branch to Millbrae. Millbrae is important because it's the transfer point for the Caltrain line that goes all the way down to San Jose, and a branch to the SFO terminal. When you just look at that on a map, especially if you're not a transit person, that looks really cool. Because it connects everything to everything else. Everything has a great trip. Looks fine. Always be asking yourself, when you're hearing interesting claims like this about transit, is this person actually thinking from behind the wheel? Is this person actually thinking like a motorist? That comes up all the time, by the way, in talking about frequency. Because frequency, although it's one of the most overwhelming and fundamental values of public transit, doesn't have an obvious correlative term in the experience of a motorist. The closest thing a motorist experiences to frequency is the cycle patterns of signals. That's the closest they get to experiencing the fact that the reality of frequency, which is that they can't go anywhere until this 5-minute cycle, or whatever cycle, completes. I think then that a lot of people who are motorists in their own lives look at transit proposals and look at the map as though it's a highway map. And if this were a highway map, if it was a map of roads that were going to connect all these places, it would be fine. It would be right. That would be good. The problem is that map, drawn the way it is not something that a transit system can actually operate because of the nature of branching. And this is a fact about geometry. The geometry of transit says that branching divides frequency. We all know that if we stop to think about it. If this is running every 5 minutes and then it branches into 2, those are going to run every 10 minutes, right? Not hard. But what that means when you look at this map is that you can't run all of that. You're going to run one of these instead. Either you're going to run your full frequency from the city all to San Francisco and all to the airport and then on to Monterey, or you're going to run it all from to Monterey and then to the airport, or you're going to branch it. In which case you're going to get less frequency to Monterey and less frequency to the airport. One of the things you could try to do is branching it, but then also adding that little shuttle between Monterey and SFO. But ultimately you may decide to just operate it as a branch. And the problem in this particular case, is that San Bruno and the other towns around there are very low density towns that absolutely do not want any more density, and are therefore always going to produce very low ridership. But while Millbrae and SFO are much bigger markets, but the problem with the branch is that we end up having to provide better service when the market is worse, and less service when the market is better, because it's just the geometry of how branching works. And you know, the most brilliant politician in the world, the most brilliant climber in the world, is not going to change that geometric fact. So the funny thing about this is that every year or so, I fly into San Francisco Airport, and I always take BART. And every year, BART is doing this differently, because you keep struggling with it. It's like you're in a really uncomfortable chair, and you keep moving around trying to be comfortable. The fact is, you're in the wrong chair. You built the wrong thing. And again, if you had been thinking in those terms as you drew that, a transit expert, seeing that map, knew immediately that's not going to work. Or at least, it's not going to do what people are visualizing when they see that map, for reasons of pure geometry. So just quickly, some of the laws of transit geometry that I think we all need to make sure we know. And I have a book project underway that's going to try to talk through these in more detail, develop and help people understand them. The fact that branching cuts frequency in half. The fact that parallel line spacing, the parallel lines that are too close together are going to compete with the same market. That's a combination of geometry and some biological facts about walking distance. Connections. If you oppose requiring connections, you're also opposed to frequency and network simplicity. If you want a network to be simple, legible, easy to understand, and frequent, you cannot then be trying to run direct service from everywhere to everywhere else. You need instead to require people to connect. TriMet is actually a national leader on this. TriMet is one of the most connected and least duplicative systems around. Density and demand. The interesting fact that double the density means more than double the transit market. And the whole issue of transit technology choice, and just the fact that much of the bus-rail distinction is simply not relevant to speed, reliability, and frequency. The law of line spacing, where during its recent service cuts, San Francisco deleted that black dotted line, the 26 Valencia, which had existed for more than a century, but had always been running just a block away from Mission Street, where there was a lot of other surface. They obviously heard a lot of, I love the 26 Valencia, I don't want to walk to Mission, but the geometric fact is that parallel lines that are too close together are competing with each other, and that you're running less frequency than you could be offering because you're running on 2 parallel streets instead of just 1 street. The law of connections, I don't want to transfer, I like my direct bus train. People hate to transfer. This cultural statements are often simply my feelings projected onto my understanding of my culture. But again, people hate to transfer. Well, if you oppose transferring, you're also opposing frequency and network simplicity. That's a geometric fact. The geometric fact is that a network designed for maximum frequency and simplicity requires the most connections. So it's a choice. If you try to eliminate connections by providing more through services, you make your network less frequent and more complex. This is a pair of maps that I used to illustrate that. It's designed to humiliate Sydney by comparison to Portland. What I say about this, I use this all the time when I'm doing presentations in Sydney. Look at the Sydney road map. It is piles and piles and piles of 3-digit numbers on top of each other. Lots and lots of complexity as they try to have a separate route from every possible A to every possible B. I point out, look at the other way this can work. You can have just one route, one line number on each street in a network where these are all designed to connect with each other. Pretty straightforward. And I talk through the various pros and cons of that, particularly the issue of complexity, the need for people to be able to hold an idea of their network in their minds if they're going to actually make clear decisions about how to use it. Here's a fun example of this out of recent rail thinking, and you'll probably encounter something like this. When people in Monterey were thinking about how they wanted to get some sort of intercity rail service extended to them, this is Monterey, San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, the easiest thing would be just to extend the Capital Corridor coming down the East Bay. But they had to have a long conversation about this because lots of people were saying, no, we have to have a direct train to San Francisco. We can't transfer it, San Jose, we have to have a direct train. To the extent that they did that, they got their whole project mucked up with California High-Speed Rail and Caltrain, which are already in that corridor into San Francisco and have taken all the space for it. And essentially, to the extent that they kept saying that, to the extent that they kept saying, we can't transfer at San Jose, not even if it's cross-platform, not if this train's here, that train's here, like they do in Europe. No, we can't transfer it. Well, what they did was basically just muck up and delay their project by making it exponentially more complicated because now they're tangled up with 2 other very difficult issues. The law of density and demand is a really interesting one. I talked about it earlier in terms of this whole question of what does a really high density system look like. The law of density and demand, and this has been explored in a lot of different contexts, is that horizontal axis is density. So you got wilderness and farmland, a place I call Sparseville, and a place that's twice as dense that I call Denseville, and then you got Manhattan, and then you got Tokyo. And that's the curve of transit demand, which is you could describe as ridership at a fixed level of service. In the range where most North American cities are, which is between 5 units an acre and 20 units an acre, that is curving upward. And what that means is that double the density means more than double the transit time. I have yet to encounter a transit agency in North America that actually deploys its service along that curve. In other words, that gives 2 or 3 times the level of service to an area that's twice as dense as this one. But if you were trying to maximize ridership, that's the curve you would follow. I'm not saying you should follow that curve. You have other things you need to do, like take care of people in Damascus and Lake Oswego and places like that where you're not going to get a lot of ridership. And so you may have a reason to run some service, to define some of your service against this curve and offer low density areas, other service for other non-ridership reasons. But it's a hard choice. It's like the plumber's choice. Do you want to fix quickly or do you want to fix well? You have to make your value judgment about that. Ultimately, your elected officials need to make that value judgment. So what I'm really saying is, what if we listen to the geometry first and try to cultivate more of an understanding of what the ultimate geometric and physical limitations are as we start? What if we try, in our educational terms, to get more bus operations experts educated in visioning and get more visioning experts educated in bus operations so that you started to get visions that were more consistent with the reality. A lot of this has to do with simply the degree of respect in the urban planning world for each of these other kinds of things. Even a world-class visionary architect like I.M. Pei would not design a building where there's no place for an elevator, or where the plumbing isn't possible. They do have architects do have a sense of the possible regarding certain kinds of expertise, certain kinds of techniques that they interact with, but not others. And I'm particularly interested in that conversation as it's developing with the urban planning. Okay, I'm done talking. Thanks very much. Let's take some questions.